Welcome to the first edition of Powered with Love 2025. Today, what we're going to talk about, the new reforms connected to the Residential Tenancy Act. I'm going to bring in Lisa. Lisa's been sitting here the whole time while I'm talking about the first edition of Powered with Love 2025. So Lisa, thank you for being caught unawares and being told we're doing this today in the moment.
No worries.
But Lisa, look, you've been in property management since you're 18.
Yes,
And commenced in real estate in 1997.
I did. Yep,
How quickly has that gone?
very quick.
Would you say in that time frame, right, other than legislation, other than tech, has really that much changed or not changed in the world of property management?
No, not really. I would say it's pretty much the same, as you said, just the tech and other bits and pieces.
Which is interesting, isn't it?
People
Because
still people.
yeah, but when you're looking at AI, when you're looking at everything else that's out there,
Mm.
not a lot has happened in this space for nearly 2.5 decades.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next decade. Imagine Elle. So it's Elle's first day today.
Mhm.
She's 18. And you met Bill when you're 18, but imagine speaking to Elle in 10 years' time, if this is what she decides to do, talking about what changes have been made in the next decade.
Yeah.
Who knows what they'll be.
Be very interesting.
But the changes we're talking about today are the changes in legislation. So some of them have been in place since October last year,
Correct? Yep.
and there's some new ones coming into place on the 19th of May. So the ones that were in place since October last year, we've got the limitation on rent increases.
Yes.
Now that's already in place. But
It'll-
talk to us about that anyway. What's that mean?
What it means is you used to be able to sign a 6-month lease with a tenant, and then at the end of that first 6-month lease, adjust the rent if it was appropriate to increase the rent at that time. Now it just means that in a 12-month,
Which then I could go into a cycle.
yes, you could. So you'd go into that annual cycle.
Correct.
Whereas now, whether it's a 6-month or a 12-month lease, you can't increase that rent until the 12-month date.
Until the 12 months, regardless of the term of the lease.
Yes.
And so let's just say I'm a landlord and we've got interest rates going through the roof.
Mhm.
We've got the costs associated to being a landlord going through the roof. So morally and ethically, it would make sense to have a bit more of a robust plan in keeping up with these expenses.
Yes.
Understanding that we're not going to have the rent higher than what the competing properties are.
Mhm.
So it's morally and ethically correct. But it means even if I was using that as a strategy and having 2 rental increases in an 18-month period, it means that's out now.
That's correct.
1 every 12 months.
Every 12 months.
And then what about the rules connected to and concerning a rental increase? So how is a rental increase applied? What's the level of logic in putting up the rent?
The level of logic is looking at what the market is currently saying that the property's worth. So you would assess what other homes with similar features are getting and what the home is currently getting. I would always recommend to an owner that they take into consideration how long their tenant's been in place and obviously the level of affordability. And it depends on each owner's circumstances as to whether they need to go right up to market rate or whether they can be a little bit lenient with the increase amount.
And I think that's a big thing for tenants to understand
Mm.
that when a rental increase happens, it's not happening because the logic behind it is my expenses have gone up. We've got to be able to justify that this is a fair and reasonable increase that's connected to what the competing properties are out there at the moment.
That's correct. And as long as you're looking at homes with the similar features and things that are around for that price range, you obviously taking into other factors into account with your tenancy. That's essentially how do you go about
I tell you what, there's a big question. We'll handle it another day. But you put someone in a rental property, you've got the affordability calculator that you use in order to assess their affordability. It just makes you wonder, how far can it go? Because if their income isn't going up and you keep putting the rent up because you can, surely at some point there's got to be some limitations to that and some brakes put on that as well.
Yeah.
Now, bear in mind, for those of you that are landlords that are listening to this say, Steve, you don't understand. Well, I do understand because I'm a landlord myself. But I'm just saying that these are the issues and challenges we have as landlords, as well as people in the home. You know, you've gone into the home with an understanding that this was the rent at the period of time and you need somewhere to live. Now, if all landlords took the perspective, we'll just keep putting it up, based on how fast incomes are going up, we'd have no one to rent our properties. But in saying that, there's some limitations there, and there has to be when it's connected to the person's affordability.
Just on that as well, there are owners that will very much consider their tenants that are in the home. And there's a difference between asking for, say you could get an $80 a week increase or even a 50. You might bring that back slightly, say you're looking at a 50 to maybe 30, depending on your tenancy, because to have the turnover cost of having a tenant vacating and starting again to find another and then achieving that price, obviously your property manager needs to be confident that you'll get that amount, but it's taking into consideration those costs as well.
Yeah. Is there an amount of money I can't put the rent up by?
If you can confirm or you have evidence that homes are getting the similar amount, you've done your research, then not really, no.
Okay. What about, and again, this already came into effect, and I think that's an important one to talk about, rental increases, because people are still coming out of fixed terms. People, even though interest rates have dropped and they're being put on hold again today, they're not rising, they're not falling. So if people are expecting another drop, it hasn't happened yet. But however, there's still people coming out of fixed terms, regardless of the drop, that are going to be going, holy smoke, Batman, what have I gotten myself into here? They've got to understand that we can't provide a magic bullet and put the rent up beyond what the market suggests.
That's correct, yeah.
So the extra fees at the time of starting or the additional fees that used to be in place and hopefully aren't in place anymore in any agencies when I was commencing a new lease. So the type of fees that people shouldn't be saying when they're entering into a new lease at the start of the term would be fees attached to what, Lisa?
Application fees and tenancy checks. So they're not costs that an owner can pass on to a tenant or an agency can pass on to a tenant.
Which they used to. And you would have think that before October last year, everyone would have stopped.
Yeah.
But needless to say, they hadn't. And that's why that legislation came into place. So that's what came into place last year. And it's funny because I remember those two things coming into place and everyone up in uproar saying, oh my goodness, the sky's falling, the world's changing, and why bother being a landlord? It wasn't that dramatic.
It's not that dramatic.
And I don't know if these ones will be that dramatic either, but let's talk through them. So these changes are coming in on the 19th of May. So Lisa, you're renting a property, mine you're not, because Lisa's a landlord as well. But let's just suppose you were. And I just decide, for whatever reason, that I want to provide you no grounds notice. No grounds notice. That's what I can do. What's that currently look like? Talk us through it. So you've got a week to go. You've got a week to go on your fixed term lease. So it's a week to go until it's an expired lease. No grounds. What's it look like?
Well, a week to go is an end of fixed term notice. Yep. So at the moment, you can give your tenant 30 days notice without reason.
Right.
Okay.
So now May comes in.
Once May comes in.
What's that look like now?
Depending on the term of your lease will depend on how much notice you need to give. So whether you had a 6 or a 12-month lease, it's dependent whether it's 60 or 90 days.
Can I provide no grounds?
You can. No grounds is after a lease expired. It'll be an end of fixed term notice, but you will need to provide a reason why that you're asking your tenant.
So I can't just say, come the 19th of May, give me my property back and can you please vacate it?
For no reason.
For no reason. And the type of reasons could be moving back in. I've got family members I need to house and there's no other alternative. Could be that I need to do significant renovations. That means that it would not be safe or uncomfortable for the person or occupant to stay in the property. Or it could be that I want to sell.
Correct.
But all these reasons actually need to be validated. They need to be documented and they need to be followed through on.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. And what's the time period? So it's currently 30 days, right? End of fixed term. No grounds. Still, it's at the end. End of fixed term, no grounds. Don't have to provide any information. See you later. What's the time period going to be now?
It will be 90. So on a 6-month lease, if you've signed a 6-month lease, it'll be a 60-day notice. And on anything over up to 12 months, it will be a 90-day notice.
Yes, that's dramatically different. So at this stage, it's just a blanket 30 days.
That's correct.
Once this comes into effect, 60 and 90, you don't have to provide a reason.
Yep.
And I guess the thing that we're unclear of at this stage is when I'm selling a property. So when the property's being sold, at this stage, it's 30, if it's a lease that's in place, the tenant goes with the property. It's as simple as
That's
that.
correct. And
No matter
up
who's
until
buying it, and that's not going to change.
no,
But let's just suggest I'm on an expired lease. It sells. We can provide 30 days notice at this stage.
at this stage, yes.
We're not sure if that's going to change.
No. And it'll be interesting to see if it does.
So maybe what we can do is we can put the answer to that in the comments when we do a little bit more research. Maybe we can do that. But at this stage, that's where we're at. Now, what about pets? Because some people want pets, some people don't want pets. I know as a landlord myself, I've got properties where I think I don't want any pets. I'm even a danger to that property. Keep me away. You didn't have to agree with that one, Lisa. And then I've got other properties where I think, you know what? Bring the whole family, the farm and the zoo. I really don't care. So how's that going to change? How's that going to look?
The biggest risk you'll have as an agent and an owner is responding to your tenant in a timely manner. So you've got 21 days to provide a reason to your tenant. If you don't, it's said that they can just proceed and get the pet or move forward with it because they've made the request. So it's making sure that you're responding to your tenant in a timely manner, making sure they're providing you with all the information that you need so you can make an informed decision.
Can I just say no?
You can say no. You would need to reasons that you could say no if it was a strated property and the strata doesn't allow the pet. If you're looking to have a Saint Bernard in a courtyard, well, then obviously that wouldn't be suitable. That would be a good reason that you could do a client that request.
What about if it's a sedated Saint Bernard that's really old?
Well, that might be different.
Just wanted to throw it out there in case someone's got it.
This is a small area. If you perhaps were an owner, I'm not 100% certain on this, but an owner that had an allergy that was planning on living in that home at some stage, you might say no to a cat. Different things like that. So we'll have to have it.
I have to put some thought behind
Yes,
why I'm saying no.
that's right.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and if you just don't respond to the tenant within 21 days, then you would then have to plead a case as to why you couldn't allow them to have that pet.
So you know how you send me some messages and I don't respond for 21 days? So if I were to do that to a landlord, to a tenant, they can just
Go ahead.
bring whatever animals they like in. Noah's Ark. That's interesting, isn't it? It's not as scary as what it sounds. There's a lot of people talking about these reforms and talking about the skies falling. What are the things ultimately that you think, with what we've discussed, if you're a landlord, you would really be worried about?
I would just be making sure I've got a good relationship with my agent and that the communication's there. You need to be responding to your agent in a timely manner. If they're coming to you with a request and you're delaying the response, well, then that could put you in a position where decisions might be made that are out of your control. So just communicate with your property manager. Property managers need to obviously communicate with their owners in a timely manner. And really, it's not a huge difference to how things are now.
I guess one of the biggest things when I'm just playing it back while we're talking about it, like at the moment, if I'm unsure about how someone's looking after the property and we feel as though maybe this is the best fit anymore, I can simply provide a no grounds termination notice towards the end of the lease. Whereas now the only way to deal with that is to try and enter into some sort of agreement, have these issues rectified. But if they're not able to be rectified, it's NCAT all the way.
Absolutely, it is. And it's so important to be communicating with your tenants, having the first inspection within, I would say, 6 to 8 weeks of your tenant moving in, addressing any issues with them. Normally, when you do that as a property manager and you have a nice conversation with your tenant around what needs to be fixed, your next inspection will be generally improved from there. It's just communication.
And it's a selection process.
Absolutely,
I
it's a
think
selection.
it all comes back to the selection process and looking at what your property management department, team, individual is doing differently than everyone else. I also think for someone living in a home, because, hey, I've been a tenant too, maybe I'll be one again, I don't know. But I guess it brings you some level of certainty and security and safety, knowing that there is a process for dealing with these things, and there has to be just cause and reason as well. So, I think it's kind of evenly balanced.
But it's also, at the time that you approve a tenant, it's making sure you're handing them a property that is in a certain standard and condition. if you're expecting them to maintain it in that way. And then also as the agent, when you're signing up your tenant, letting them know what you expect of them so that when you do come to do the first inspection, it's not a shock that you expect lawns to be tidy and other things like that.
Yep, I think there are valid points. Well, thank you so much. I think what I'd like to move over to now is everyone wants to know where the property market's at. So we just talked about the changes and legislation, how it affects someone in a home, how it affects a landlord. Moving over into the world of where the market's at here. Oh, I'll tell you what we will do. What we will do, just on thinking before we move on, we will put in the comments whether or not there will be changes when I'm selling a property. Because when I'm selling a property, if I'm in a fixed term lease, doesn't matter, reform, no reform, what every tenant needs to understand is you come with the property.
That's right.
So if I've got a 12-month lease, the property's selling, you're going with it, end of story. However, if I've got a couple of weeks to go, property's getting sold or it's expired, either way, you can be provided a 30 days notice when the property sells.
That's correct.
So we'll look into that because at this stage we can't find anything anywhere to suggest that's changing, but we'll put that in the comments below. So you know the answer to that. But moving across to what's happening in the world of real estate, because you're looking at buying an investment property.
Yes.
The market's going gangbusters. The property clock, based on what the experts are saying, Newcastle and Lake Macquarie's in a recovery phase. We'll move into a rising market phase. We'll then turn into a booming market. And all this is expected to happen over the next 24 to 36 months. Now, I'm not Nostradamus. I proclaim to not try and look into a crystal ball, but this is what everything is pointing towards, that we're in a recovering market and it's going to get better, right?
That's right.
So what's some questions do you think that might be going through some people's minds when it comes to getting in real estate? What do people tend to think about?
Well, the first thing I would want to know is how can I use the recovering market?
I think that's a good question. So there's a number of ways that you can use the recovering market. So you already might have an investment property. So with that investment property, maybe you could look at things that you could do to the current floor plan. You could look at unutilized potential in the land. So you and I met with an owner the other day and he was going to look at what he could do as dual locks and subdivisions.
Granny flats,
this type of thing. And so now what I've got the rising market plus that compounded with any capital improvements. That's also going to be caught up in the upswing as well. So it's a win-win on both sides. So I could be using it like that. We also could be using it to make some improvements to my existing home as well, getting a reval, drawing out that equity to go in and get an investment property.
Well, what would be another question I would think would be, what is the right investment property?
That's such a broad question. I think what happens is we're trained as consumers, because you and I are consumers as well, to go to a real estate agent and say, hey, listen, I'm looking for an investment property. What we're not trained to do is do what we would do if we were to see a financial planner. And that's where buyer agents can sometimes be of value. But even then, have they done it? Are they doing it? And do they really understand property? I think there's some out there that are doing a brilliant job and they're very much helping people with a property advisory service. We can do the same and we'll not charge you $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. But the question is, what do you want to achieve from owning an investment property? And in what time frame do you want to achieve it? And that's going to determine what sort of property you purchase. Is it going to be something that you want to value add to, rip out the equity? Is it something you want to value add to and sell? Is it something that you want to do some work to and get some additional leases so you can increase the revenue? One of our clients that you and I know, can't say his name, but he worked here for a period of time. We helped him purchase 3 properties. With those 3 properties, with a 90% gearing, ended up with positive cash flow of $120,000 a year. So 2 properties were purchased in Argentine, both with granny flats, one in Cessnock, house divided into 2, granny flat and storage. So it can be done. You've just got to find the right agent or the right property advisor that can help you unlock your goal by using the property correctly. So the answer to that is very broad because it comes back to what do you want to achieve and then working out how to use property to make it work.
Yeah, definitely.
What else? What else do you?
When do I pay capital gains tax?
You don't pay capital gains tax on your principal place of residence. So some people, I've seen some people, I know one guy, he's moved 32 times over something like 25 years, he and his family. And that acquired a massive net worth. His last property he just sold was $10 million. So his last home he just sold was for $10 million. He started off in the western suburbs of Sydney in a very modest, normal home. He also amassed another property portfolio outside of that, because every time they traded up, they bought investment properties and hung on to those as well and invested in shares. So he took the strategy is, why would I pay tax? We're going to use our principal place of residence. From an investment property perspective, after I've owned it for 12 months, I'm going to pay capital gains tax on 50% of the upswing in the value of the property.
Right. And another thing I would probably ask is, do I have to use finance from a bank to buy a property?
You don't have to use finance. One of my first properties I purchased after opening this business, so I'd bought properties previously, sold them, and a whole heap of other things happened along the way. And so I decided that I needed to lead by example and get back into property. I'm not sure if you were here at the time, but we poured all our money into buying our property buildings here and making sure you guys and girls were safe first. So then I decided to buy a property and get back into the market myself. Now, I actually bought that off a guy who's now a real estate agent, Dale, who was a client of mine, and he had a property for sale, was unable to sell it. At that time, I was not able to get finance through a mainstream institution, one of the big four. So I did a rent to purchase with an option to purchase. Purchased it for $370 off him, negotiated a percentage of my rent that would come off the purchase price, did renovations, and valued at $450 a year later, went to the bank, borrowed $355 on a $450 purchase home, and didn't put any money in as a deposit.
Right, there you go.
Because what they're looking at security and serviceability. So I ticked serviceability, and the security was there, and the equity in the security was there, because I was borrowing $355 on a $450 purchase. So there are ways you can go about it. It always comes down to serviceability. So that's my ability to repay the loan. And then what's the security like? So typically, in order for a bank to like security, you're going to need a 10% deposit. That was a way of me purchasing a home without me using money here, without me putting pressure on my team members to make more money so I could make money. I got the property to work for me.
And if you're looking at getting into a property and you don't own property already, what costs are involved in owning a home?
Okay.
The other thing.
Yeah. Land rates, water rates, agency fees if you're going to be leasing the property out. And then if you go over the land tax threshold, you're going to pay land tax as well. So that's a really shitty tax. That's no different than us right now, based on the number of people that we employ. We pay payroll tax. So it's really a ripoff, because you're paying tax on top of tax on top of tax, but you can't avoid it. So once you get over a particular land value, you start paying land tax. So land rates, water rates, insurances, repairs and maintenance. Now, because you're buying residential property, if it's an investment property, if it's not in a strata complex, you're left to your own devices to plan for repairs and maintenance. So I always say to people, with that residential investment property, get some money, put it aside, and just build it up like an admin fund.
With strata levies and things that you pay.
So you're not blindsided. So when you're getting into this investment property, you might have $5,000 or $10,000 put aside for the hot water service, anything else that might break along the way, but plan accordingly.
And if you're doing that over a period of time, any tenancy after a while, 5, 7, 10 years, you're going to look to do those renovations. It's always better if you've got.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what a lot of people don't allow for.
Yeah, 100%. So I guess I'm trying to think of the main costs associated with it. I'm sure there's lots of other little costs. I guess one cost I didn't mention was landlord insurance.
Yes.
The number of landlords that don't have landlord insurance, it's scary. So because you've got your house insurance, you've got everything else covered, but landlord insurance, you're mad not to have that one. What's landlord insurance cover, Lisa?
Landlord insurance covers you for loss of rent, damages by the tenant, depending on who you're with and what policy.
Yeah.
And for events that you might have, repairs where you might need to claim compensation for your tenant, or items where there's been damages to the home that you can't avoid, like storm damage and other bits and pieces like that.
Yeah. And look, it's really important because people don't think
Super
about that.
important.
And
Well, you don't need it until you need it.
no, and we see the tears. We see the tears when people go, no, I won't worry about it. Then something happens that's catastrophic. They're out of pocket. And then next thing you know, they then learn, even though they've been educated in the first instance, that your main insurance won't cover it.
That's right.
And then they're out of pocket. And I've seen people do forced sales because of that. So, Lisa, look, they're the main expenses I can think of. I probably think that's a wrap.
I do too. They're the main things that I can think of that I would want to know. So, yeah, it was very, very interesting.
Perfect. Well, you know what? Thank you very much for everyone tuning in. Hopefully you all learned something as well. And stay tuned for next week because our goal is to provide you as much value as possible to empower you to use property to improve your life in some way, shape or form. My name's Stephen Cromedy and this is Lisa Watson and you're just being powered by love.